Good morning. Welcome everyone to Hudson Institute. Welcome to our in-person viewers and our online viewership as well. As we meet here to discuss today's event, which is resisting the Taliban and preparing for the future of Afghanistan. This month, August of 2024, marks a number of grim three-year milestones. After U.S. troops all but departed Afghanistan by late July 2021, on August 6, 2021, the Taliban captured Siraj, the capital of Nomruz province in southwestern Afghanistan. This marked the first time in almost 2 decades that the Taliban was able to capture and hold a provincial capital. Soon after, government-controlled provincial capitals started falling like dominoes, which led us to our next grim milestone on August 15th when the Taliban finally captured Kabul. Now this week marks a particularly grim milestone when on August 26th of 2021, we had the Abbey Gate attacks, which resulted in 183 people being killed, 170 Afghan civilians, and 13 U.S. service personnel. And by August 30th, the last U.S. soldier departed Afghanistan for good. By September 11th of 2021, on the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, the Taliban actually controlled more of Afghanistan than it did on September 11th, 2001. But there is another 30-year anniversary this August that we can mark that gives Afghans a glimmer of hope. That is August 17th. This was the date that Ahmad Massoud, the son of the late historic freedom fighter Ahmad Massoud, established the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan. Based in the mountains of Panjshir and active in more than a dozen Afghan provinces, the NRF is right now the only significant, serious, major, credible, non-extremist armed opposition against the Taliban. He is here to speak to us today, of course virtually, and we're honored that he has taken time out of his schedule to do so. Mr. Massoud earned degrees from esteemed institutions in the United Kingdom, and he's also a graduate of the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. Although he did not engage significantly in Afghan politics until 2018, he has dedicated years to developing and expanding grassroots efforts, especially in Panjshir, and his efforts then are now bearing fruit today. It is a great honor for Hudson Institute to welcome such a courageous freedom fighter to address us. Now, after Mr. Massoud gives us an update, we will then have a panel discussion moderated by my friend and colleague, Jeremy Hunt. And we'll discuss the current situation in Afghanistan, what the NRF is doing, and what the U.S. needs to do to support them. But first, please join me in welcoming Mr. Massoud.
Thank you very much, my dear friends. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to be a part of this important event today. I want to begin by expressing my deep appreciation to the Hudson Institute for bringing the critical issue of Afghanistan back to the spotlight, especially during a time when the world is grappling with so many pressing challenges. Your unwavering dedication to the subject over the past few years is truly commendable. I would also like to extend my congratulations to the Hudson Institute on the launch of the insightful paper authored by our good friend Luke Coffey. This paper, which we have all eagerly awaited, should serve as a powerful catalyst for further discussion about the future of Afghanistan. Personally, I am eager to delve into the recommendation that emerged from this work, and I sincerely hope that policymakers in Washington will take these lessons to heart. While the paper provides thorough analysis, I would like to take a moment to share my thoughts on 5 critical issues that affect the people of Afghanistan today. First, the complex challenges facing Afghanistan's people. The people of Afghanistan are currently enduring a multitude of grave political, economic, security, and social challenges, all of which are the result of human actions. Exhausted by years of conflict, the population is increasingly desperate for liberation from the Taliban's oppressive regime. Sadly, the Taliban have exploited the fatigue that the world has regarding Afghanistan, continuing to impose draconian policies that choke daily life, particularly of women of Afghanistan. Over the past 3 years, their illegitimate rule has shattered by any illusion of a more pragmatic or moderate Taliban. Taliban 2.0 or good Taliban, unfortunately, past 2 years approved and showed does not exist, revealing a group as dogmatic and repressive as ever. Their actions indicate a willingness to collectively punish the entire population of Afghanistan, leading the country toward the brink of further bloodshed and a safe haven for the terrorism. Second, the escalating threat of terrorism. Since August 2021, Afghanistan has transformed into a haven for regional and international terrorists and terrorism. Over 21 terrorist networks are operating within the country, with thousands of foreign terrorist fighters receiving protection and assistance from the Taliban. You have all seen the surge in the terrorist activities across the region, especially in the neighboring countries of Afghanistan. And the reason being is the Taliban being a role model for all those terrorist groups. The recent tragic events that happened in Pakistan, many innocents who lost their lives in the act of terrorism, is a proof, just in the past few days, that the continuation of the current situation in Afghanistan will further destabilize the region and our neighbors in Afghanistan and the world. The recent terror attacks and the recent events truly have connections to Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda has grown stronger than it was in 2001, and ISKP continues to expand with each passing day. The Taliban are also establishing radical jihadi madrasas in all of Afghanistan 400 districts. With these thousands of jihadi madrasa, it will be a pipeline for hundreds and thousands of youth into the extremist of ideologies. We, the National Resistance Front, are the only force so far continuing the global war on terror within Afghanistan. It is imperative that we work together to prevent further attacks that could result in global catastrophe. However, even if you're alone, it is our national duty to defend our right, to defend our people for a better life and for freedom. Third, the international community's policy of appeasing. As I mentioned before, unfortunately, so far we have been alone, and we have been left alone, and we have been left forgotten. Over the past 3 years, the international community have pursued a policy of appeasement and unconditional engagement with the Taliban, which has been criticized massively and collectively by the majority of people of Afghanistan. However, it is crucial to understand that Afghanistan has changed. While the Taliban may control the country, they do not represent the will of the population. Afghanistan's youth, especially young girls, have dreams and aspirations no different from their peers around the globe. Social media is flooded with the voices of these young people. And a recent UN report indicates that only 4% of the population supports Taliban and their ideology. This clearly demonstrates that the people of Afghanistan are trapped under Taliban's reign of terror and tyranny. And the fourth, what we want. The National Resistance Front is a part of democratic forces and the people of Afghanistan who are fighting for a free and safe and democratic Afghanistan. The NRF emerged from the remnant of the fallen republic with a steadfast commitment to establishing a democratic and pluralistic Afghanistan for all citizens. We have carried out hundreds of successful operations against the Taliban after the Taliban refused to talk, negotiate, and to accept the will of people of Afghanistan. After the fall of Kabul, I have engaged in talks with Taliban for many weeks, but the Taliban refused time after time to talk and to allow the people of Afghanistan to decide. I went even to this point that I told them that I am willing to give up my own life and I'm not looking for anything, but only for the people to decide. There is one condition that we want, although the Taliban were ready and they wanted to offer me a position in their government. But my request was simply one thing. Where is the rule of people and where is the position of people in that? I wanted and we wanted, and the people of Afghanistan want one thing, for them to be able to decide for the future. So what I requested and what I still request is just simply one thing, election. If the Taliban have any support within Afghanistan, if they have any courage to even say such thing that they are the will of people of Afghanistan, then they should happily allow people to decide in the ballot of votes and through the votes, but they refused. So therefore, after we have been forced to, and we have been left with no choice but to pick up arms once again and to fight, we have managed to do something unimaginable and almost impossible. From the ruins and from the ashes, we emerged once again. And just last year, we have carried out hundreds of operations successfully with no casualties to anything and to any civilians. Our approach to violence is carefully calculated, aimed at protecting our communities from those who are targeting teachers, engineers, and health workers. In response to the Taliban destructive policies, we are redefining militarism and our history. With each passing day, more of Afghanistan's people are rallying to our side. And we are now active in over half of the country. This year alone, we have expanded into the western and eastern regions, successfully challenging the Taliban and their tyranny. However, all of this, it is for a democratic of Afghanistan. One of the means that we want to reach there, it is through political activities that we have been active and we have been involved in. And one of is the Vienna process for the future of Afghanistan. For the first time, we have established a political process that is led and owned by the people of Afghanistan. Independent of significant foreign support, the Vienna process for democratic Afghanistan exemplifies our ability to unite and move forward collectively. It is important that international community recognize and assist this need and allows us to prepare for a democratic alternative. The National Resistance Front focus on three primary areas: instilling hope among the people and preventing the normalization of the current situation. We know that the situation is very hard and we know how lonely our people feel. But what we should do is to keep this flame and this hope alive in the darkest time and the loneliest of eras. The second, engaging in discussion with all key political figures and parties and forming a united coalition against the Taliban in current situation and other terrorist groups. And prevailing current situation and establishing a government that belongs to all, that all of us, all Afghans, they feel safe, they feel they belong to that government, to that establishment, and also they can be able to live peacefully with each other and with the world. In conclusion, we fully recognize the high expectation placed upon us by the people of Afghanistan. Many see the NRF as a potential successor to the previous government, but we are determined to meet those expectations, but to create a situation with the help of the people of Afghanistan, alongside many other parties and groups, to once again make Afghanistan to possess a government that we all feel belongs and we be proud, and to once again find our spot in the world. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to my colleague, Mr. Nazari, addressing your questions and concerns during the panel discussion. Thank you so much for having me. God bless you all.
Awesome. Wow, it's just so great having Mr. Massoud here to talk about what's going on the ground. And I want to thank all of you for being here, our live audience, and those watching at home. I want to moderate a panel, really some esteemed individuals we have here to talk about what's going on in the last 3 years and even time before that. I'm excited to invite Ali Nazari, who is the head of foreign relations of the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan. He assumed the position after the Taliban returned to power in 2021. And before assuming this position, Mr. Nazari worked as a liaison between various resistance groups and international organizations, facilitating aid and support to those fighting against the Taliban. Thank you so much for being here, Ali. I appreciate that. We also have Ambassador Haidari. He served as the ambassador of Afghanistan to Sri Lanka and is also an adjunct professor at the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. And most recently, he started a think tank called The World in 2050, where he served as a senior fellow and diplomatic courier there. Previously before that, he was the Director General of Policy and Strategy of the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs of Afghanistan from 2015 to 2018. And of course, our very own Luke Coffey, who is a senior fellow here at Hudson and just has an extensive body of work in Central Asia and throughout. And most recently, just as Mr. Massoud mentioned, he just published this report talking about why the U.S. should support the National Resistance Front in Afghanistan. I'd encourage all of you, if you can, after this, to pick up a copy. It really lays out the issue of what's been going on and how the U.S. could partner with the NRF. Before we get started, I'd love just to have each of you just share some opening remarks and share kind of what we all should know about this issue.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, I would like to thank Hudson Institute for hosting this event today, especially our good friend Luke Coffey, who wrote this fantastic policy memo that presents and recommends policies that can certainly both help the democratic forces of Afghanistan, especially the NRF, and global security as well. So, of course, Mr. Massoud, the leader of the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan, had a comprehensive speech right now explaining the NRF, our objectives, our vision for Afghanistan. But I would like to elaborate a bit and to give a bit more explanation where we stand. Of course, we formed right after the collapse of the Republic of Afghanistan on August 15th, 2021, from 2 provinces in the north. Basically, the NRF is made up of both a political wing and a military wing. The military wing solely composed of the former forces of Afghanistan, armed forces of Afghanistan, which were trained for 20 years to fight terrorism. And so on August 15th, thousands of these forces, instead of fleeing the country and abandoning the fight, they came to the north, and since then they've continued the fight under the banner of the NRF. For the past 3 years, of course, we've proven a few things, especially in the battlefield. Our will and determination to continue the global war on terror, to fight terrorism of all forms, of whatever group there is, whether it's the Taliban terrorist group inside Afghanistan, regional terrorist groups, and global networks such as al-Qaeda and ISKP. And of course, our ability, our capabilities. For the past 3 years, since our resistance started, we haven't received a cent of external support, external assistance. Basically, the regional countries and the international community have stayed away from supporting the resistance against the Taliban, the resistance that the NRF started on August 15th, 2021. And whatever we've done is based on the support and generosity of our people. And so for the past 3 years, we've been able to not only survive and sustain our presence inside Afghanistan, but we've been able to expand and grow. From 2 provinces, now we're in almost 20 provinces. Just in the past 8 months, we've been operating in well over 15 provinces. In the last 40 days, we have had operations in over 12 provinces. Just this year, from January of 2024, we've had around, just our latest operation was last night in Herat City, but the total amount of operations, successful operations that we've had since January of 2024 is around 206 operations in all of these provinces, in northern Afghanistan, central Afghanistan, western Afghanistan, and eastern Afghanistan, especially now since the start of this year in the cities, in the urban areas such as Kabul, Herat, and elsewhere. So that shows our ability and capability. Thirdly, the last 3 years has shown who has popular legitimacy inside the country. The reason why we've been able to expand without any support from outside of Afghanistan is because we enjoy the support of our people from whatever ethnic, religious group they are, both men and women. They are lending us a hand. They are supporting us because they know the current situation isn't in their interests. No one inside Afghanistan, as Mr. Massoud mentioned, only in a survey that was conducted by the United Nations, only 4% of the population expressed support for the Taliban.
Wow.
And so we are the forces who enjoy legitimate support from the population. They help us, whether it's in rural Afghanistan or urban Afghanistan. This is why the Taliban are unable to find our networks. From January of 2024 till now, we haven't had any casualties. Our forces haven't had any casualties. And this is driving the enemy into confusion. It's exhausting them. It's frustrating them. And they're mentioning this all over the place. We leaked a memo a few weeks ago that their intelligence unit is showing concern and is worried in a few provinces in the north around Bagram Air Base that NRF forces are having movement, they're recruiting, and they're planning and facilitating attacks without them knowing and having intelligence to stop this. And so we've shown this for the past 3 years. The ball isn't in our court anymore. It's now time for the international community to step up and to take and to adopt a more realistic policy that's not only in its interests, but in the interest of Afghanistan's people. Because the trajectory that we are on today in Afghanistan, even though we've been making strides, we have achievements, but we're doing it all alone, and we can't fight 21 terrorist groups, regional and global terrorist groups, without support, without assistance. And so our message to the international community is time is of its essence. If we don't use this opportunity and especially empower the democratic forces, the anti-terrorist forces, which they were trained to do so for 20 years, which we've been determined to do so for 30 years because 2024 is the 30th anniversary of the creation of the Taliban terrorist group. They were created in 1994. We're in 2024 today. And for the past 30 years, it has been us who have been facing them in the battlefield. From 1994 to 2001, before 9/11, we were fighting this battle all alone. After 9/11, of course, the international community came in, but they abandoned it once again in 2021. And since 2021, we've been continuing this. If we want to prevent a catastrophe on a global scale, I think it's the time to take action and to rethink the policy on Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Ambassador? Sure.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you, Luke, for continuing to stay with the people of Afghanistan and for the Hudson Institute. Unfortunately, in today's Washington's fashion of, unfortunately, for think tanks to go where, of course, certain policy interests and objectives take them, but I think Hudson is one which has stayed very close to its mission of helping support freedom, democracy, equal human rights across the world. And I think Luke has done it not only, of course, in Ukraine, where everyone now talks about, but certainly is still with Afghanistan. I think his eloquent report speaks to that. I read that. It's short, about 14 pages, but every word counts. And I told him that's one of the best reports that I've read probably for a long time. And I recommend that you all take a look at it. His recommendations on concrete, not just for Democrats, but also, of course, Republicans, whoever wins in the next coming up elections. And it's, again, for what the Afghan people demand: democracy, pluralism, human rights, equal rights. We see it every day, as Mr. Massoud and as Mr. Nazari pointed out. And NRF, I think, represents that voice. I don't belong to NRF. I'm a former service officer, apolitical, not a nephew or a son of anyone. I just went back home to do my part from Georgetown University, and I'm back there now doing my part to continue to speak for the people of Afghanistan, who are suffering from a multiplicity of crises. We just heard that, from political security to economic, social, and a very complex humanitarian crisis, where you have, on the one hand, gender apartheid converging with climate and as well as conflict. It's not true that, of course, the Taliban have brought peace. It's not sustainable, as Mr. Luke Coffey's discussed in his report. Afghanistan is very insecure. On any number of days, unfortunately, people die directly as a result of violence, and indirectly, something that people don't talk about. If you look at the socioeconomic indicators, especially social indicators, Afghanistan has gone back to the 1990s, where more people are dying as a result of the draconian policies, edicts, and decrees, the last of which the Taliban just announced, the promotion of virtue and prevention of vice, are dying today. Because if you stifle women, if you imprison women, then their children suffer. That's the future of Afghanistan, and the youth suffer. And I think the only perhaps group that is really speaking up and resisting is the NRF. And as a result, we need to, I think, pay attention to the situation in Afghanistan, because it has implications not for the Afghan people, as we saw in the 1990s. That's why Afghans are leaving by thousands, especially the youth, going to Iran, from there to Turkey, and then ending up on the shores of Europe. But also the status of women, as we know and read about almost every day. So radicalization is a serious threat, as it was mentioned, because where women are imprisoned and are not able to bring up and raise their children in a way that they should, unfortunately, and where the economy is collapsed and there are no jobs, and where the Taliban is investing so much of our national revenues into building these madrasas, very much styled after those Deobandi madrasas of Pakistan, then in just a few years you will have a sizable radicalized youth, because Afghanistan, remember, is one of the youthful populations in the region, with over 60% under 25. And that has direct implication for regional stability and global security. As you mentioned in your report, I think there are already terrorists, not only from, of course, within Afghanistan, those loyal to a number of regional terrorist groups, including IMU, ATIM, each of which have their own Daesh wings, because Daesh in Afghanistan is not organic, it's inorganic, it's very much embedded in the Taliban, especially the Haqqani network, and as well as al-Qaeda. And they're all, interrelated and intertwined symbiotically. So this as not just an implication for the Afghan people who have been unfortunately abandoned, but for the region. And I think the message for the region is very clear. I've seen it in the recent attacks from Pakistan to Iran to Moscow. And now, of course, the recent attack in Germany that is associated with Daesh, those that migrate, those who are brainwashed by Daesh and related networks online. So my message, again, on behalf of the Afghan people, very much discussed, debated in the recent Vienna process, again, which is the only process out there as an umbrella for all Afghans under which they have come together now, some 70 different groups, networks of both genders and as well as youth to discuss exactly what we discussed, and that's the national consensus among all Afghans, regardless of ethnicity, sect, and linguistic and regional, demanding a pluralistic, a democratic a government consistent with the very nature and culture of the Afghan people. We in the Swiss are very much alike. Why? Because they're mountainous and we are mountainous. And mountainous people often are free-spirited. They run away from, an authoritarian regime, from the center, and seek autonomy. As a result, that egalitarian nature of the Afghan people make them a perfect candidate for, institutionalization of democracy, something that the Afghan people fought and bled by hundreds of thousands up until August 15, when unfortunately the Biden administration decided to withdraw their support for a growing young democracy with transformational achievements, with a direct, unfortunately, impact on the global appeal, for democracy, which has unfortunately been diminishing because of what happened in Afghanistan, which again can be restored by continuing to support the 95+ % of the Afghan people demanding democratic rule consistent with the Afghan culture and Islam, very much enshrined in the Afghan constitution, which was enforced before August 15, 2021. So I stop there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. I want to thank Mr. Massoud and our guests for heaping so much praise on my report. It runs the risk of raising expectations so high, you'll read it and you'll probably never return to Hudson again. But thank you very much for those kind words. On the report, a serious note about the report. I am fully aware that it is a report about Afghanistan that's very narrowly focused on U.S. support to the NRF and making the case on why it is important for the U.S. to do so. And I'm very aware of all the other multitude of challenges that the U.S. faces as it pertains to the Taliban, pertains to the plight of the Afghans, the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan that's taking place, the tens of thousands of Afghans who were left behind in the country that we promised to get out, and the tens of thousands of Afghans that we got out and brought to this country, but they have no legal path forward to remain in this country. There are a lot of issues that need to be addressed, but this one issue about supporting the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan is one that I believe deserves more attention from U.S. policymakers and lawmakers. And I think there are 4 reasons why supporting the NRF makes sense, and I'm going to list them now. The first one, which admittedly, or I should say sadly, in the divisive nature of our politics in our country right now doesn't have as much meaning as it would have had 15 or 20 years ago. That is the moral reason. We should see it as a moral obligation to help those who we served alongside, who have sacrificed so much for U.S. interests over the past 2 decades. We should follow through with these moral commitments. And let me tell you, on America's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, America's disastrous defeat in Afghanistan, there's plenty of blame to go around. President Trump baked this deal, and President Biden could have changed it, and he didn't. He had no problem changing dozens of other Trump-era administration policies, executive orders, agreements, but this one he says he couldn't change. And that's because we know, looking back at the history from the time President Biden was Vice President Biden, he never really liked the Afghan mission anyway. So we had this perfect political storm of incompetence as it pertained to Afghanistan, and we are where we are today with this. So we should have the resolve to identify those Afghans who can continue to resist Taliban rule, and we should, at a minimum, for moral reasons, support them. The second is counterterrorism. As Ali pointed out, and as Mr. Massoud alluded to, there are numerous transnational and regional terrorist organizations operating in Afghanistan. Go back and look at the agreement that was agreed between the Taliban and the Trump administration, what the Taliban promised about al-Qaeda and terrorist organizations in that country, and then look what's happening there now. There's a litany of reports out there that show that transnational terrorist organizations are proliferating in Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda is operating in this country in a way not seen since before 9/11. If you want proof of this, just consider the fact that the leader of Al-Qaeda a couple of years ago was killed in a US drone strike in Kabul. Well, what the hell was the leader of Al-Qaeda doing in Kabul to begin with? So clearly there are counterterrorism threats in Afghanistan that are compounded by the openness of our southern border. And wouldn't it be helpful for the US to have at least one credible and trustworthy actor on the ground that we could talk to and work with when it comes to our counterterrorism efforts in Afghanistan? The NRF in this sense isn't a silver bullet for the United States and our counterterrorism goals, but it's certainly one important tool in that counterterrorism toolbox that we should be using. And that's another reason why we should be working with the NRF. The third reason is ensuring and protecting America's geopolitical interests. Look at the map of the Eurasian landmass. Afghanistan is right in the middle of it. By definition, anything in the heart of something is important. Afghanistan, for centuries, has been geopolitically important because of its location, because of its different ethnic groups, because of its different ties to regional powers, and there's no reason to be the case going forward. So you look at the rise of China, belligerent Russia, concerns that US policymakers have with Iran, and you overlay that with the transnational terrorist threat, and it just makes sense that the US has someone we can engage with in Afghanistan. And then the final reason, we should just heed the historical lessons of Afghanistan. We can like it or we can hate it, but the reality is Afghanistan brings us back, okay? And it may be far away for people looking at a map, but going back, and I listed it all here on a nice timeline, going back 2 centuries, there are at least 19 occasions where US or European powers got involved or intervened in some capacity in Afghanistan. Some of these were wars, some of these were airlifts, some of these were counterterrorism strikes, some of these were diplomatic missions to try to alter the geopolitical balance in the world. Some of these were development and financial assistance initiatives to counterbalance the Soviet Union. Some of them were to, in the case of Russia or the later Soviet Union, it was to install certain powers in Afghanistan. But 19 times, so roughly about every 10 years, if you average it out, someone far away from Afghanistan, for better or for worse, is getting involved in Afghanistan. So again, wouldn't it make sense just to have a partner on the ground that we can work with so we can be smart about it? Now, what can we do about this? There are policy options that are out there. I think the main problem we have right now is that as a nation, perhaps, and certainly this administration, there's just so much shame, or there should be, about the way we handle this situation that nobody really wants to talk about Afghanistan. I mean, if you look at the Republican National Convention, the Republican National Committee platform doesn't mention the word Afghanistan once. The Democrat platform talks about the great foreign policy success the withdrawal from Afghanistan was. It's like we're in complete denial. But if there's a new administration and a new approach, a fresh approach, at least, it won't be new in a sense that it's either going to be Trump who was before or, President Harris, who was vice president when all this went down. But it may offer an opportunity for a clean slate going forward. We should pursue this, and there are some policy options that we can do. And I just want to run through a few of these now. The first thing we should do is just establish contact with the political office of the NRF in Tajikistan. At a minimum, let's send a CENTCOM liaison officer from the U.S. Defense Section at the embassy in Dushanbe over and just have a cup of tea and a conversation. Let's do that. What I would like to see is the U.S. mission to Afghanistan, which is currently located in Qatar. I would like to see that moved to Dushanbe. Make it physically, geographically closer to Afghanistan in the region and closer to the NRF. We should also send senior level officials to the next Vienna process meeting. As Mr. Massoud discussed, the Vienna process is this diplomatic track that the NRF and other opposition groups to the Taliban is pursuing in Vienna. They meet roughly twice a year. We should be sending the U.S. Special Envoy to Vienna to observe these talks. It would be great for a congressional delegation to be sent there to participate in these talks. We should invite Mr. Massoud to Washington so he can address Congress. I think it would be nice to hear an inspirational message. I think the American people would like to hear this. I think there are hundreds of thousands of Afghan vets. We would like to hear this. I think it would just be good to invite him to Washington and engage with him on that level. We should continue refusing to recognize the Taliban as the legitimate government of Afghanistan. There are a lot of countries that are really flirting with this, getting close. We should do what we can to advocate against this. And as the United States, we certainly shouldn't go down this road. And I'll say, I understand that there are practical, pragmatic reasons why we have to now talk to the Taliban, who are the de facto rulers of Afghanistan. But what I don't understand is, how are we as a nation willing to take this pragmatic position of talking to the Taliban on issue-by-issue basis, but we won't even formally or informally, for that matter, reach out to the NRF? It makes no sense to me. It's geopolitical negligence, in my opinion. And we should also, finally, we should find ways that we can support the NRF, whether we want to go the non-lethal route, just cold weather gear, radios, secure communications, night vision goggles, this sort of thing, or we can get a little more ambitious and we can talk about options for lethal aid, although admittedly I don't think this city is anywhere near that discussion right now. But there's $7 billion frozen of Afghan central bank funds. Apparently, indirectly, I know there's a lot of misinformation, this is a very complicated issue, but indirectly, hundreds of millions of dollars are going to Afghans, possibly via the Taliban indirectly from the US taxpayer. So maybe some of these funds can maybe indirectly find their way to the NRF so they can do things like the Vienna process, so they can establish political offices in key capitals. I think this would help advance the debate, show the world that the Afghan people want an alternative to the Taliban. And America can achieve all of this. The four reasons I set out, the geopolitical reasons, the moral reasons, the counterterrorism reasons, the historical reasons. We can achieve all this with what is actually very little resources and no US troops. So I think this is something that we need to start considering. I do hope that after January of next year, we can start having a grown-up debate on what we need to do about Afghanistan, because I suspect, I hate to say it, but I suspect in about 10 years, we're going to have a newfound interest in Afghanistan once again, if history repeats, and we're going to be there without a partner on the ground that we can work with. Thanks.
Thank you, Luke. Ali, I want to come back to you, and on this point, Luke, I hit on this too. Just we were this farce of a Taliban 2.0, and they're going to supposedly have all these empty promises of cutting off their ties with al-Qaeda and all these things. We know none of that ever happened. And in the last 3 years, al-Qaeda and ISIS have actually been strengthened under Taliban rule. Can you talk a little bit about that, about just the threat of transnational terrorism and how they have now a safe harbor in Afghanistan once again?
Of course, this is a warning that we've been giving for years. Even before August of 2021, whenever I had discussions, or the leader of the National Resistance Front, Mr. Massoud, had discussions during his trips before August 2021, which he has narrated it in his book, which came out a few months ago. We warned the international community, we warned the United States and others who were present in Afghanistan that the Taliban haven't changed, that whatever promise they've made must not be trusted, that these are all false promises, that this is a false narrative that they're selling in order to return to power. And we've seen this after August 2021. Now it's evident that the Taliban not only, they have changed, of course, but they've radicalized. They haven't moderated, they've radicalized since 2001. And the latest proof is the set of laws that came out last week by the Taliban, where basically it isn't different than what ISIS implemented in Iraq and Syria in 2014, and other terrorist groups in the Muslim world. Women can't speak, women can't sing in public, women can't show their faces in public, to laws such as forbidding people from speaking with non-Muslims, and very extremist thoughts and beliefs and views that shows that ideologically there is no difference between the Taliban, al-Qaeda, ISKP, and all these other regional and international terror groups. When it comes to the Taliban's role in promoting, supporting, and assisting these groups, there's now ample evidence after 3 years that we can use and come to this conclusion. 3 years ago, when we were stating all of this, or others who were stating this, no one believed us. They were saying, no, the Taliban has changed, we're interacting with them, engaging with them, we have an agreement where they say we're not going to allow al-Qaeda to grow and pose a threat to the international community again, and we see them as a partner. But now there is evidence, there is plenty of United Nations Security Council reports, reports coming from other intelligence services that show the seriousness of this threat. We see countries who previously supported them, who founded them, who provided them sanctuary, like Pakistan. Pakistan from 1994 supported the Taliban, were their #1 partner. After 2001, they harbored the Taliban's leadership until 2021. But today, they even betrayed Pakistan because of their jihadist ideology, that they're supporting a group, a strong group called the TTP, or the Pakistani Taliban movement, and they've been increasing their efforts against the Pakistani government to overthrow this government and to expand the so-called Islamic Emirates. If Pakistan is unable to trust them, if Pakistan considers them a threat, if Pakistan considers the Taliban as the #1 sponsor of terror, how can anyone else trust them? 1. 2 is, of course, the movement and the activities of terrorists that we see inside Afghanistan. Besides the regional terrorist groups like the TTP, Jamaat Ansarullah, that is threatening the stability and peace of Tajikistan and other Central Asian groups, al-Qaeda has been expanding itself. Just this year, al-Qaeda has built and established 8 new bases. Al-Qaeda in the 1990s up to 2001 was only present in a few parts of Afghanistan. Today, al-Qaeda is present throughout the country. For the first time, al-Qaeda has a footprint in northern Afghanistan. For the first time, they are present in the Panjshir Valley. This was impossible for them to do back in the 1990s, before 9/11. But today, al-Qaeda is present in the occupied parts of Panjshir Valley. In the heart of Panjshir, which is Bazarak, they have munitions depot there. They have their training centers. Many of these foreign terrorist fighters have even brought their families. So you can just imagine how the situation is much worse than what we faced in the 1990s with terrorism. As Luke rightly stated, the leader of al-Qaeda was in Kabul, and he was, of course, neutralized 2 years ago. Yet the new leader of al-Qaeda, Saif al-Adl, right now is residing in Afghanistan, is managing the affairs of al-Qaeda. And after more than a decade, he came out with al-Qaeda's most significant message in the month of June of 2024, saying, Afghanistan is once again safe for us. And he writes this. It's an article. It's found online. It's open source. He writes it in Arabic and has been translated in many languages. Saif al-Adl writes that once again, Afghanistan is safe. He assures jihadists around the globe that Afghanistan is safe, meaning we have a partner in Afghanistan, which is the Taliban. He calls upon all these jihadists to migrate to Afghanistan and to learn from the example of the Taliban and to train, recruit, and prepare themselves in Afghanistan. And then to plan and facilitate attacks, and he uses this term, the West. And this is being ignored. How many people in Washington know about this statement right now? I haven't really heard this on the news. I haven't heard it in the two campaigns. And just imagine, al-Qaeda is preparing itself to expand its jihad once again in the West. And it came out a statement that's a declaration of war. And of course, and we're seeing the threats now. Last week it was in Germany. We saw fortunately, many attacks that were foiled, that were neutralized. But such intentions and such plans to attack civilians and non-civilians, whether it's in the West or elsewhere, is a reality now. If the attack against the concert in Vienna wouldn't have been neutralized, we would have had thousands dead right now. Just here in the United States and North America, in the month of June, 7 terrorists were arrested in 3 different US cities. 7 terrorists who entered the United States through the southern border. And they were, of course, Tajik nationals, so they belonged to Tajikistan, but they didn't travel from Tajikistan. They traveled from Afghanistan. That's where the Tajik national, the Central Asian terrorists reside in right now, that are living under the protection of the Taliban, that are receiving arms, munitions, funds from the Taliban. They have even been handed over the security of the northern border. The Taliban have allowed these Central Asian terrorists to control the border with Central Asia. And these Central Asian terrorists are training and going to different countries, including the United States. And this is evidence where the Taliban have distributed Afghanistan's passports to these foreign fighters, whether it's al-Qaeda or these regional terrorist groups. So imagine how many terrorists have infiltrated Europe, North America, with the guise or disguise of being refugees. If 7 terrorists were arrested here in the US, imagine how many more are here just waiting to plan an attack and implement an attack. While inside Afghanistan, the NRF are the only forces fighting all of these terrorist groups, but receiving no support, receiving no endorsement. And of course, we're going to continue this. We are determined to continue this. But fighting 21 regional and international terrorist groups isn't an easy task. No. And we need the cooperation of the international community to expand, to be able to challenge them. Because one thing that I want to state here, the Taliban, the current situation of the Taliban is very fragile. The Taliban isn't a monolithic group. They're divided into many factions. Kabul and Kandahar are at each other's throats. And we might face an implosion within the Taliban. As soon as the implosion happens, a vacuum will be created inside Afghanistan. If the NRF, if the democratic forces of Afghanistan aren't ready for this vacuum, if we're not strengthened, you have other terrorist groups use this opportunity. ISKP might step in, al-Qaeda might step in. And addressing that catastrophe will be much more costly than addressing it today. It will be much more complex and difficult to address it then than it is today. And so it's better to rethink the policy, to take Afghanistan once again into consideration, and to start a path where it's in the interest of both Afghanistan's people and the international community.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Ambassador, I want to come to you. As we're wrapping up here. Looking at the international community, why is it important that the international community refuses to recognize the Taliban? And can you talk about the kind of case against making sure that the Taliban is not normalized and officially recognized in the international community IC circles?
Well, I mean, the Taliban is still an armed non-state actor. Remember that the Taliban forcefully captured Afghanistan and overthrew a democratic elected government recognized by the international community and under international law. And the Taliban has been in very clear violation of the United Nations Charter, and as well as all international humanitarian and as well as human rights laws, as well as Afghanistan's international obligations, which include 7 instruments of human rights. And we see the gender apartheid only enforced in Afghanistan in gross violation of the UN Charter and related instruments, as well as international human rights law. And so it's very clear why the international community, including Pakistan, the Taliban's traditional sponsor, which is Pakistan, has refused to recognize the Taliban as much as it was, with the support of Pakistan, which the Taliban was able to overthrow the government in Afghanistan, and as well as facilitated by this premature withdrawal from Afghanistan. And so it's very clear as a result from the reports of the Human Rights Rapporteur, Mr. Richard Bennett, who unfortunately was just refused entry to Afghanistan. He wanted to go for his, I think, 3rd or 4th report, building on what he had reported in the past, in part because of the way he exposes the Taliban and a violation of international laws and that which underpin a rules-based world order. And also because the region and the world at large, aside from this pragmatic approaches and engagements, they don't see a future with the Taliban. Each one of our neighbors in the region look at the Taliban as a strategic trap. While engaging with the Taliban for pragmatic reasons, but definitely not engaging in a way that the Taliban has expected them to. For one, China has been promising and over-promising the Taliban to invest in Afghanistan for the past 3 years, but yet China has put no capital-intensive investment in Afghanistan simply because they don't trust the Taliban, because the Taliban is harboring and giving safe sanctuary for members of the East Turkestan Islamic movement, the Uyghur separatists and terrorists in Afghanistan. And as a result, the same is true of Uzbekistan, while engaging with the Taliban, but not trusting the Taliban simply because the Taliban is providing safe sanctuary for members of the IMU, and as well as for Tajikistan. The Taliban have already facilitated the creation of the what they call the Taliban of Tajikistan. And the TTT is already actually operational, and the Badakhshan of Tajikistan directly threatening the stability of this fragile, unfortunately, probably least developed Central Asian state, Tajikistan. And so as a result, Tajikistan has realized that and has been more cooperative, I think, with Afghanistan's growing national resistance, and yet maintaining, a degree of engagement with Tajikistan. And that's because as much as the international community had been talking about this, a new version of the Taliban 2.0, that has not materialized. That the Taliban, as Mr. Naziri just pointed out, have only worsened ideologically, and as well as in terms of posing threats at home and in the region and across the world, given their intertwined relationships with that 20 other regional and global terrorist networks, especially Daesh. As much as now we talk about how Daesh and the Taliban are fighting, but we know that Sanullah Ghaffari used to be a close associate of Sirajuddin Aqani, who has now a bounty of $10 million from FBI of the United States. He's also a sanctioned leader of the Taliban. And if you look at now the relationship of the Minister of Defense of the Taliban, he is the brother-in-law of Osama bin Laden. I mean, his sister married Osama bin Laden. So it's not only, these ties are not just ideological, but also familial or relational, and as well as financial, because some of these terrorist networks working with different countries and the state actors also bring a lot of resources, and their proxy conflicts with other state actors in the region. When we could point out even the Daesh wing of India in Afghanistan, unfortunately, targeting, of course, Pakistan and so forth. As a result, it's very complicated, and that's why I think the international community, on the one hand, engaging in proxy ways and pragmatic, direct engagements with the Taliban, yet they don't see a future on the long run and the Taliban. And as a result, the only alternative is the Afghan people. That 95% of the Afghan people, more than half of whom are women. And women want what? They want equal rights, they want democracy, they want pluralism consistent with the Afghanistan's egalitarian culture. And that's why these women, the Afghan people in general, embrace democracy. And repeatedly, despite the challenges, terrorist attacks, braved threats to participate in a number of presidential and parliamentary elections to elect a democratic government that is inclusive, that represents more than 55 ethnic groups. When we talk about it, it's 4 or 5 major ethnic groups, but Afghanistan is very multi-ethnic simply because Afghanistan, at the heart of Eurasia, had always been the superhighway of the old Silk Road, bringing different ethnicities, looks, features from across the world. If you go from one small district to another, you will see different people, different looks, different dialects. So Afghanistan is very diverse and naturally rejects this totalitarian, authoritarian regime of the Taliban, superimposed and also with a wrong interpretation of Islam, which is unfortunately fueling Islamophobia. And that's why the Afghan people have been calling on the member states of the OAC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, to actually fight this a lot more actively, because if they're after trying to address Islamophobia and developed countries, one way to do it is to help rationalize the status quo under the Taliban. If their own women and their own girls and families enjoy the same basic civil rights, regardless of the form of the government, say in a place like Egypt. Now look at the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is liberating women simply because he knows that for Saudi Arabia to really develop on a sustainable basis and to compete regionally and globally, half of its population need to be in the workforce and lead the way alongside demand. And these are some of the countries that actually recognized the Taliban in the first round in the 1990s, including Emirates and Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Now, Emiratis are getting very close to the Taliban. They're now tapping in all three different four factions of the Taliban, including the faction led by Mullah Baradar, representing Qatar, the Haqqanis, led by Sirajuddin Haqqani, Mullah Yaqub, who's the Minister of Defense, and as well as the Supreme Leader himself, Mullah Haibatullah, centered in Kandahar. So we encourage countries like United Arab Emirates that, look, we all sit and talk about Dubai and life in Emirate. Everyone aspiring to go there to get jobs and whatnot. Giving any sort of freedom and opportunity for their own citizens and as well as foreign workers and visitors and experts, and yet siding with entities like the Taliban, unfortunately, against the Afghan people, which on the medium to long term is going to cause regional instability and international peace and security. So what the Afghan people want, nothing more than actually asking the international community, the member states, especially those in the P5, to just act on those resolutions that they pass one after another. You look at the latest resolution, it condemns the Taliban. If you just look at the July report by UNAMA in Afghanistan on the moral oversight activities of the Taliban, which it condemns, and the statement just came out from the UN Special Envoy or representative to Afghanistan. And so we're not short of what the knowledge of what the Taliban are doing, nor are we short of past resolutions that have been released and adopted by the member states in the P5 over the past 3 years. And if there is one place where, say even Russia and China and the United States, the three competing, confronting major powers, Afghans, at least on the paper, that is, to help rationalize the status quo in Afghanistan, that they see no future, no alternative in the Taliban for ensuring regional stability and maintaining international peace and security under the UN Charter. And that's what the Afghan people want. And that's what also I for the first time went to the Vienna process, fourth meeting, and as much as it was labeled one way or the other, but what I found there, Afghans from all, ethnic groups, like I said a while ago, from both genders, youth, talking exactly about what we have discussed today for the international community to help, support their efforts to engage with the Taliban constructively, to bring the Taliban as one of many sides in Afghanistan to help form an inclusive, representative government through a results-oriented intra-Afghan dialogue that needs to start. I mean, the steps have been taken by the Vienna process, but with the support of the international community, especially the administration here and whatever administration that will come into office, I think that process has the potential to take off, bringing all Afghans under one umbrella in engaging with the Taliban, not only politically, but also I think the Afghan people want their growing resistance. It's not limited to NRF. There are a number of other resistance groups now, the freedom fronts of both, two different ethnic groups in Afghanistan, including one by ethnic Hazaras, and as well as another front run by a former Pashtun commander. There are at least now 4. So which means, they all represent that one demand from the international community to help them politically, to talk, including the Taliban, but also help their resistance where the Taliban are reluctant to do so because they're fed up the status quo. It's killing Afghans, it's driving Afghans out with implications for our neighbors, the region, and the world at large.
Wow. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for that. And thank you also, Ali, and Mr. Massoud for joining. This is just an honor. And we just thank you for your fight and how you're fighting for your country. And thanks for sharing more about what the NRF is doing. And just as another reminder, please pick up a report talking about why it's important that the United States stands with the National Resistance Front. I want to thank everyone for being here, and even folks watching online. Stay in touch with us. You can go to hudson.org to see our upcoming events. We'd love to stay in touch with you. So take care.